Welcome to Equity Matters, Navigating Equity Compensation, a webinar series hosted by Countsy. Today, we discuss the 2025 Workplace at Work report published by Morgan Stanley. Today's guests are Gavin Block, Strategic Growth Lead at Countsy, Rodney Bolden, Executive Director and Head of Industry Engagement at Morgan Stanley at Work, and Carine Schneider, Founding Partner at Compass Strategic Advisors, who will be the moderator for this discussion. We hope you enjoy this conversation. And Carine, now over to you.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad we are here. I am really interested in this topic. I think if I'm watching the news or reading the newspapers or magazines these days, everyone's trying to figure out what's going on in the workplace, what's going on with the employer-employee relationship. So I'm really excited today to have Rodney, who has got a lot of information to share with us, as well as Gavin from Countsy. Gavin is also going to share some statistics and other interesting things that they're seeing at Countsy as they work with hundreds of companies every day who are facing the challenges that we're going to talk about. So before we jump into things, Rodney, can you just give us a quick background on yourself and what you do there at Morgan Stanley?
Sure. So I am head of industry engagement, which means I do our thought leadership research on the current and evolving trends in the workplace, both from the perspective of the employer and the employee. And then I come on fun webinars like this and talk all about the findings.
Great. And I know you go to a lot of conferences, so you probably glean a lot of information from all the conferences you go to. So look forward to hearing more about that. And Gavin, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Countsy?
Yeah, sure. Been at Countsy just over a decade now. We outsource accounting, finance, and people ops, primarily for venture-backed startups and growth companies. As the strategic growth lead, I'm involved with a lot of client development, business development, partnerships. So we get a pretty broad spectrum of kind of the tech ecosystem from super early stage through later stage VC rounds.
Great. Well, before we get into it, so Rodney, can you tell us a little bit about this particular survey that we're going to talk about? Just give everybody a little bit of background about who you surveyed and when and all of that.
Absolutely. So the Morgan Stanley at Work State of the Workplace Financial Benefits Survey is something that we have done now for 5 years. And the background behind the survey is we wanted to be able to better understand what are the financial challenges, goals, and general financial well-being of today's employees, both from the perspective of the employee and also the HR leaders. So we surveyed 1,000 U.S. employed adults as well as 600 HR leaders from companies and asked them a series of questions, and not only about financial well-being, but the workplace benefits that support employee financial well-being, like equity compensation, like retirement benefits. And in the 5 years, we've always found some very interesting statistics around what's going on, but it's helped us to communicate with the industry and also our clients so that they can better tailor their benefit strategy.
Well, let's not bury the lead here. So 5 years, a lot has changed. So you started this kind of right in the middle of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are the big differences you're seeing? What is evolving?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I really have always believed in with research is that sometimes if you only stick high level, you miss some of the nuances and some of the demographics. So we disaggregated the data by generation, gender, years at company, industry, size of company. I would love to talk about all those different segments and what we found, but we only have a half hour, Carine.
Right.
So
right.
I'll just say a couple. So what was fascinating is that, as you know, younger employees today tend to say that they're only going to stay at a company less than 5 years, and older employees are looking to stay at a company 15 or more years. However, so when we looked at tenure at a company, what we found is that employees who were employed for less than 10 years at their company, they were much more likely to say that due to current economic conditions, they had to reduce contributions to their retirement plan. They've had to accelerate their financial planning efforts in order to make up for lost time. They are more likely to be financially stressed and to have that financial stress impact both their work productivity, but also their personal life. So that was one cut. Then the other cut that I found fascinating this year was company size. So when we looked at employers or employees rather who work at companies that had less than 500 employees versus those that have over 500 employees, what we found is that those who worked at the smaller size companies, those with less than 500 companies, that they were also more likely to say that due to what's going on in the economy, they've had to reduce payments on their debt. They've had to contribute less to their emergency savings. That they also, once again, just like what I said a moment ago with employees with less tenure, they also were more impacted by financial stress, and also not just stress. They had issues with the day-to-day financial management of their lives, specifically budgeting.
Yeah. So Gavin, I'm curious, you guys work with a lot of different companies. One thing that I've noticed is it seems like the size of companies are getting smaller. You need less people to do what you used to before. And you work with a lot of startups. Are you seeing that in the statistics, or is it just my gut?
No, you're accurate. I think it goes hand in hand with the adoption of AI, as well as just early stage companies are just staying lean. They want to extend their runway. I have some reports on my desk from Sequoia, Crunchbase, and Carta, and they're all saying the same thing. The amount of time between a seed and a Series A is extending, and we're seeing headcount declines, especially at the earlier stages. Not so much at the later stages, but at the earlier stages, we're seeing much more of a headcount decline. For example, for seed stage companies 3-4 years ago, they were on average about 11 employees and up to 26 at the Series A level. They're now staying around 6 employees at the seed stage and 17 at Series A. So it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with adopting AI technologies, because it doesn't mean you're going to get rid of departments or groups. You're just going to require less headcount in those specific departments of companies.
Right. Which I think goes back to your point, Rodney, that there's two things. One, it's probably harder to find a job. Because these companies are just smaller. Instead of having a marketing group of 10, you only need a marketing group of 2, which is less jobs. But if you do have the job, you're maybe a little bit more nervous. And again, let's talk about AI for a moment. Did you see anything like that in your survey where people are worried about losing their jobs? I mean, one thing is I don't have enough money to pay my bills, but another is I might be laid off soon.
Yeah, it's interesting because employees, when we take a look at employees and their feelings around AI, it's all over the place. So number one, what we're seeing in surveys, such as we sponsor a survey with the Employee Benefit Research Institute in Greenwald called the Workplace Wellness Survey. What we found in that is that only about a third of employees are now saying that they are worried that AI will replace their jobs. So that's a good sign, because a few years ago, that was like 50%.
Oh, okay.
Employees are less worried about that, but they're still worried. And why are they worried? So they're worried because they're looking at AI and seeing the productivity gains, seeing how it can help them in their career. But at the same time, what is going to be the employer expectation for me? Meaning, okay, if I'm doing 80% of the job I used to, and AI is doing 20% of the job, does that mean my compensation is now 80%? Does that now mean my performance review is going to be less stellar than what it had been? Because my managers say, hey, you're using AI, so, you're getting help, basically.
Yeah.
And that's a real concern for employees. And unfortunately, what we're seeing also in the data is that HR leaders really have not set a strategy around how to implement that performance management around AI and set the expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. I listened to a podcast yesterday and they were saying that their statistic, and I don't know where they got it, is about 40% of employees are now using AI on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And,
Gallup came out with it.
Sorry?
Gallup came. I'm sorry, Carine.
Oh, Gallup.
Gallup. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's, that's a lot of people using it. I thought it was interesting too, Rodney, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned about the risk to companies that their employees are using AI, sometimes secretly, sometimes on their personal laptops. Can you just comment on that a little bit?
Sure. So there have been a series of studies done by WalkMe, done by UKG, and others that talk about how employees today that are using AI, many of them are using their own personal AI tools. And unfortunately, not only using their personal tools, but they're putting in proprietary data or PII, personally identifiable information from clients into those AI tools that are not sanctioned or authorized by the company. And to even take a step further, in what we're seeing in those same surveys is that employees are saying they're keeping that AI use that they're doing at work a secret from their employer. So that is definitely a cybersecurity risk for today's employers. And this is why employers really should, number one, train their employees around AI, but also set clear standards, because that's another thing we're seeing is that employers are not sure what the company's AI standards are. What are the rules and regulations or best practices that companies want their employees to use when it comes to AI?
Right. Yeah. Now another trend, Gavin, I've been seeing is this whole idea of a fractional. And I think 5, 7, 8 years ago, you had fractional, accounts payable people and stuff like that. Now I'm seeing fractional CTOs, fractional CROs, maybe CEOs. So this is obviously the business you guys are in. Talk to us a bit about that trend and what you're seeing in terms of how that's changing the relationship with the employee as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially again, when you're looking at earlier stage versus mature, larger organizations, you oftentimes don't need FTEs or full-time hires in a lot of functions. In fact, when I look at the Crunchbase data that I cited earlier, we're seeing that the roles that they are hiring full-time are things that you typically are a little bit harder to outsource or use fractional. So like sales, product, those are really embedded in the organization, but accounting, legal, finance, infrastructure, IT, those are roles that we are seeing the increased use of the fractional resource. The other comment I was going to make earlier, Carine, is while we're seeing a decline in headcount with our clients and just tech companies in general, the exception is hardware as an industry. So deep tech, hard tech, all the space, startups, climate companies, they are the only sector within tech and life sciences that we're actually seeing an increase in headcount. So I thought that was interesting. And it makes sense because those tend to be more complex, complicated businesses that do require additional headcount to grow.
Yeah.
And if I could pick up on that, Gavin, one of the things we saw in our surveys that when we asked the HR leaders, what is your top strategic priority for this year, the top thing was hiring and retaining talent. And I found that interesting because we all see, like you said, folks are downsizing. But then when we dug in deeper, what we see is that when they say hiring, they're not talking about hiring tons of people. They're talking about very strategic hiring. So if it's, they're building out their AI strategy or the AI tools, it's a person that can do that. Or if they're looking to beef up their leadership team, it's a person that they've been looking at for a couple of years, but now they want to pull the trigger and get that person. And that was the other thing that was fascinating when we talk about retaining talent. One of the things that was interesting that we found is that when we asked about the strength of a company's benefit package as HR directors, it's a question we ask every year, we saw a 55% increase in those HR leaders who said that they were on a good path to adding benefits that few of their competitors have. So it makes sense that retention is a strategy, not just a strategy, but also we find that HR leaders every year are saying, hey, we're on a better path than we were when it comes to having the right benefits, because they realize the importance that benefits play in retaining talent.
Yeah, and we're also at Countsy, we're seeing long-term and short-term incentive strategies. So long-term refresh grants, restricted stock units. Refresh grants are up 20-25% from year over year. And for short-term incentives, we're seeing a lot of annual bonus plans starting earlier in the company life cycle. So once you get over 100 employees, especially if you're an AI company, 100% of those companies in the Sequoia survey says that they've adopted those bonus plans at 100 employees versus other companies are just coming much later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm based in Silicon Valley, and you used to never talk about a bonus in a startup. If you weren't public, there were no bonus payouts. You got equity. So that now, we're starting to see that part of the negotiation, part of the package. So we are called Equity Matters. So let's talk a little bit about equity compensation. Rodney, anything in the survey that kind of jumped out at you in terms of equity compensation?
Yeah, it was interesting. So we asked employees, what's the biggest that receive equity compensation? What's the biggest benefit to receiving equity compensation? Top answer was, it gives me a stake in the company's success. So when it comes to equity compensation, many companies have been beating the drum. Equity helps create an ownership culture. So it seems like employees got that. But when we ask HR leaders the same thing, well, what do you think the biggest benefit to employees is of receiving equity compensation? They said that it helps employees to achieve and meet their long-term goals like retirement. So there was somewhat of a disconnect there. And I think that really illustrates how employees, even though they're seeing it as a stake in the company's success, really have not honed in on everything that equity can bring to your financial life, such as utilizing equity for your long-term goals, your midterm goals, like buying a home, being able to do that. I hear constantly from equity plan managers stories about folks who get into a financial bind and, I really wish I had something that I could use to get me out of this financial bind. And the equity plan managers like, you have a bunch of equity you can use. And just they don't add that up.
Yeah. That's been a revolving trend over my 40 years of my career. Is I'm still shocked in 2025 how people haven't logged in, don't go in, look, don't try to understand it. It's crazy. Gavin, anything in your statistics in terms of are companies granting more, granting less? What are you seeing on that?
It's been pretty stagnant for the past couple of years. I would say, since sort of 22, 23, they've just shrunk. The equity packages have shrunk and just since then, and they've just kind of remained the same.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you ask about that at all, Rodney, about the size of the packages?
Not in this survey.
Okay.
I mean, it's something that we do benchmark, but it's not part of this survey. But one thing that I was just thinking about related to what we were just talking about is employee awareness, is education. And when we asked how effective is your equity education program, HR leaders were much more likely than employees to rate it very effective.
Of course.
Surprised. I know you're both shocked. I know that's shocking. But what was fascinating is that employees who are financially stressed were far less likely to say that their company's equity education program was very effective. So digging into those numbers, what we're seeing is that there's a direct correlation to being financially stressed and not being able to understand how equity can get you out of that financially stressed situation. And that means that companies have to do a better job of not just saying, here's what an RSU is, and here's what a stock option is. Here, other than that, here's how you can utilize it. Here's how you can use equity within your financial situation.
Right.
Carine, I was just going to make one follow-up point on salary. We are seeing salaries, I think overall it's about a 3.5% merit increase year over year. That number skews a little higher for venture-backed startups. typically in the 5, even 5.5%.
On
So
base.
of the
Okay.
base, correct.
That's interesting. Yeah, because you would think those typically would be companies that are trying to conserve cash, but they're having to do this to retain their employees.
Right. I mean, I think overall net, they're hiring less and keeping a close watch on that, that salary expense. But I think the roles they are hiring for, they're willing to pay a little bit more to get the top talent.
Yeah. What I'm hearing too here in the Silicon Valley, and I'm starting to hear this more kind of in conversation with people, is these super base salary packages. And when I'm talking about super base salaries, I'm talking about coders and AI folks and data scientists who are getting $1 million or $2 million in base because they're just so hard to find. And so, we've all kind of looked at the sensitivity about where you are physically now, because I'm hearing more and more. One of my clients is trying to hire someone, and the perfect person was in San Francisco, but their office is in New York. And the woman said to me, we just can't hire this person because they're not in New York and they're not willing to move. And I'm like, but they're the perfect person for what you're trying to do. It's a real strategic role. So I'm curious, if you're seeing any of this amongst your travels or in the conferences you've been going to, these super pay packages, I guess we could call them.
I am hearing more of that. I was just at a conference last week in San Francisco, and one of the panels that came after my keynote talked exactly about that, how, they are seeing for those very high value roles, and needless to say, many of them are in the artificial intelligence space, pay packages that you have not seen. I won't say ever, but have not seen in quite some time. Because it's so hard to find that right person for that particular role. And it's so competitive, where I've heard at other conferences about bidding wars for talent, which goes contrary to what we see on a macro level, where there are more people unemployed today than there are job openings for the first time since 2021. So it goes counter to that narrative, but there are certain folks, certain talent who's really able to leverage this current need for specialized AI skills.
Yeah. And I think these people, because I talked to one of them, is I think they're talking about a $2 million base package. And I said, wow, that's a lot. Not a CEO. We're not talking executive level. And I said, what about the equity package? And he said, that would take me 2, 3, 4 years before I'd start to see this. And I'm just not willing to wait. They're willing to pay me the cash up front. So I want the equity. But, I don't know if I'll be around in 3 or 4 years, because the other thing I think with AI is things are moving so much quicker. So what he can contribute in 6 to 9 months used to be 4 years. And so I'm curious, with the equity packages that we're seeing, I'm wondering if we're going to start to see vesting schedules change. And I have one client right now, they grant every year, and you get a 1-year grant, and next year you get another grant. And it's not the old 4-year vesting that they used to do. And they said, do you think that's odd? We really want to give you a 1-year vest, a 1-year grant. And then next year we're going to evaluate you again and decide what we're going to do next year, because we don't know, how to give you a 4-year grant seems like a very long commitment for us to make to you. And I'm wondering if these other people are going, yeah, give me a 1-year grant. I might be out of here in a year.
And with Gen Z increasingly entering the workforce, what we find is that Gen Z is very entrepreneurial. So it's not about, I'm looking for a home as a company. I'm looking for the package that's going to be best suited for me today, because tomorrow I have other dreams.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Gavin, are you seeing any of that? I know you've got some data from Carta. Any interesting things that they're seeing as they're looking at these awards?
And not so much specific to the awards. I think the overall venture funding market is up 11% this past quarter versus a year ago. But we're seeing, seed rounds, on average or median about 3.5 million, and then it goes up to about 10.5 million for Series A. So we are seeing those rounds. But if you look at all the funded companies over the past 6 months, a little over 60% of the overall funding went to AI companies.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to start something not AI, there's less available money out there for you, and it's just going to take longer to complete that raise.
Right. Which hence means less employees, right? Because you're probably bootstrapping it. So yeah.
Something that's interesting, Carine, is we're seeing an uptick in the acquisition activity of startups. So there's been a surge in the first half of this year of seed and Series A companies getting acquired. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with just the overall M&A activity, IPO markets increasing, and we're seeing a lot of even our own Countsy clients at that Series A level, a fair amount are getting acquired.
Yeah. And I think some of them are acqui-hires. I know of one company I was talking to their CEO, and he said, we've got 15 great data scientists, AI people. They're in another country. And he's like, and I know people in the US want to get to those people, but it's too hard for them to hire them. So, we know that we're an interesting acquisition target just for our people, let alone the IP, the clients, everything else. So, and I think we saw that maybe 10 years ago where there were a lot of acqui-hires back when people were looking for good software engineers. That was just the way you did it. Yeah. So Rodney, let's just as we're kind of getting to the end here, in terms of the age group, when you look at your survey, you said you did look at gender, you did look at age. I'm curious just on gender. Did you see a big difference in the way men and women are responding to financial stress or responding to their jobs? What do you see there?
Yeah, well, when we look at gender, what we're seeing is that we do see higher levels of financial stress among women than men.
Okay.
We also see that women are more focused on some of the day-to-day financial challenges. Both are focused on long-term retirement preparation, but higher percentages of women say that financial budgeting, paying down debt, those are two things that you see are concerns at higher levels for women. We also see that men are more likely to receive equity compensation than women.
Do you have a percentage on that? I'm curious. I don't know if you know.
I don't know off the top of my head. It wasn't a huge difference.
Okay.
But it was a slight difference.
Yeah.
And then and so those were the big themes when it comes to gender. And of course, we saw themes with generation as well, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's, when I've run software companies and we're sitting on all the data, whenever we looked, men always received more grants. Now, men tend to be more engineers tend to be men. Grants tend to go to engineers versus, finance or administration or whatever. So it is not unusual. And I think it's been a trend for many, many years. Very interesting. Well, this has been great. Any closing thoughts, Rodney or Gavin, from what you've been seeing across the surveys and your conversations?
I would say for me, one of the things that I saw is that in our State of the Workplace surveys that we also, for those employees that don't receive equity today, over 80% of them said that they would want to receive equity.
Okay, good to know.
So
they're missing it.
They're missing it. Exactly. So for companies that are looking to retain some of that talent, if you're not having some sort of, if it's an employee stock purchase plan, if not outright granting equity as part of their overall compensation, you want to look into that because companies, especially highest generation that wanted equity of those employees that don't receive equity, millennials value having equity as part of their compensation, the greatest out of any other generation. But that's also because when we look at millennials, they tend to also be the biggest recipients of those that are receiving equity compensation. So talking to their colleagues. So that was another thing. The other thing is that you don't, if you only, as I said at the start, look at the top line numbers when you do your employee financial wellness survey or financial wellness needs assessments, you won't see some of the nuances. Because even though Almost 6 out of 10 employers do a financial wellness needs assessment for their employees. Far fewer do it through a demographic lens of geography, gender, generation, veteran status, level of disability. You can really miss out on some key nuances and needs if you don't do that.
Yeah, and I would just add from our lens of working with venture-backed startups and growth companies, because they're staying leaner longer, keeping headcount down, we're able to continue to support and work with these companies longer than we have, say, 5 years ago. And so that gives us just an increased amount of time to understand sort of the dynamics, their hiring strategies. You just have to get creative and thoughtful because there's fewer positions as they start growing. And so being that an advisor to them and helping them has been really interesting and critical.
I was going to ask, so at Countsy, you do that type of work. You'll work with management, help them understand their data, help them understand. And I think one of the things I like about Countsy is that you do the stock plan administration, but you also do benefits administration, payroll administration, accounting. So you really can look at the whole company and give that kind of feedback.
Yeah, it's all the day-to-day. We're not involved with product or the science or the engineering, but all the day-to-day operations, the equity administration, the finance, of course. So we definitely play a role. And we, as a result of been working with probably thousands of companies over 15, 20 years, we have a lot of historical knowledge and data and can help, the companies as they figure out their longer term strategy.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave you with this thought as we end things. On this podcast yesterday, it was a Q&A about AI. And one of the questions that came in was, do you think there will be a point where companies won't need CEOs anymore and that AI will manage a company? And it was a panel of guests, and all of them came back and said, no, the CEO still needs to set the culture, set the strategy, that the relationship with the employees is not something that AI could ever replace. And I thought that was a really interesting question. So I don't think we're there yet. I think we're far, far from that. But just curious, as we end, get your thoughts from both of you. Do you think AI can someday be the CEO of a company?
I think anything's possible. I will share one statistic that 38% of employees today say they would prefer an AI manager to a human manager. Being a Gen Xer, that scares the heck out of me.
Yep.
And I also will recircle back to what you said, the difference between men and women receiving equity, 5 percentage points.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I would say probably not in the next 5 to 7 years would be my guess, Carine, as far as a AI CEO. But it's moving so fast. I mean, even on the accounting side, we're embracing a lot of the AI technology, but it's not 100%, where you just hit a button. Yeah. So, I mean, we're not running from it. We're running towards it because it allows us to be efficient in the work, whether it's the outsourced equity part, the accounting, the people operations. So we're embracing it. It allows us to just take on and support more and more companies. So that's the benefit to it. But we're not at the point where you're just hitting a button and it's done.
Right. And that was, I think, what this panel was saying, is that the human interaction we all crave is not going away. The relationship, the customer relationship. I mean, Rodney, we were talking about your travel schedule, and your clients still want to see you, right? They don't want to be talking to ChatGPT. So that's good news. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much for your time. I'm excited about our next webinar in October 14th. We're going to switch gears. And at Equity Matters, we're going to be talking about stock plan compliance with Meyer Levin from Slice. And it's going to be a great topic to kind of understand, how do you make sure that your stock plan stays in compliance? And by the way, they use a lot of AI, so we'll be talking about that. So thanks again, Rodney. Thanks, Gavin, for the time and your expertise. And I do want to mention, if you are interested in the workplace survey, Rodney is very kindly will make it available to anybody who wants to reach out to him. As soon as we're done, his email will come up on the screen, and you can write Rodney and let him know, and he'll be happy to send you the actual report. Is that correct, Rodney?
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. And Gavin's always available to chat with anybody who might be interested to talk a bit more about what Countsy does, does or how Countsy can support your company. So thanks again, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks, Carine.
Thank you, Carine.
We thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar with Rodney, Gavin, and Carine. For more information, please scan the QR code for their LinkedIn pages or visit us on Countsy.com. Please stay tuned for our upcoming webinar. On October 14th, we will have a discussion with Maur Lefran from Slice Global about compliance in reporting and equity compensation. Please follow us on our LinkedIn page for any updates on the upcoming webinar, and we are looking forward to seeing you at our next one. From all us at Countsy, thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.